They kicked me out of my own home. My quiet revenge plan left them begging on the streets. The chill wind bit at exposed skin, but it wasn't the cold that froze him. It was the sight of his grandfather's antique workbench, carefully restored, now lying splintered on the curb, its delicate joinery shattered into irreparable pieces. His great-grandmother's porcelain vase, a cherished family heirloom passed down through generations, lay in a dozen shards near the overflowing bin, its painted peonies now meaningless fragments. Lysander, his cousin, stood on the porch, a triumphant sneer contorting his face, his arm possessively around Briar, his wife, who gazed at the wreck of a life with a predatory glint in her eyes, a hunger that seemed to devour the very air. "Get out, Dax," Lysander had barked just moments before, his voice thick with a fake authority he believed he'd earned, a cheap imitation of command. "This is our property now. Your squatting days are over." He simply watched, his hands tucked into his pockets, his gaze unwavering as hired thugs, brutish men with vacant eyes, tossed his life's possessions onto the street like refuse, each thud a deliberate insult. They saw a man defeated, broken, his world crumbling around him. Lysander chuckled, a harsh, grating sound that grated on the quiet street, as he pointed to a particularly battered crate. "Look at the carpenter, Briar. All his precious tools, ruined. He has nothing left." Briar giggled, a brittle, high-pitched sound that seemed to slice the already cold air. "He'll be begging on the streets by tomorrow, Lysander. Just as you predicted." Her eyes shone with a cruel satisfaction, a mirror to her husband's avarice. They didn't see the quiet satisfaction in his eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor of anticipation that ran through him, a current of calm resolve beneath the facade of despair. They saw the ashes of his home, he saw the meticulously laid foundation of their impending ruin. They believed they had taken everything. They were wrong. They had merely activated a plan years in the making, a silent, intricate mechanism designed not for immediate retaliation, but for a slow, agonizing unraveling. The house, his grandfather's legacy, was not a prize for them to exploit. It was a perfectly crafted cage, and they had just locked themselves inside. They saw him as a simpleton, a quiet, easily manipulated architect content with sawdust and blueprints. They couldn't have been more mistaken. His name was Dax, and this was the story of how his quiet revenge plan left them begging on the streets. Life, for him, was never about grand gestures or flashy displays. He was an architect, yes, but his true passion lay in the intricate dance of wood and the patient geometry of structure, a craft he inherited from his grandfather, Silas. Silas wasn't just a builder, he was a philosopher in sawdust, a man who believed every joint told a story, every beam held a secret. He was a quiet observer of life, finding profound wisdom in the subtle shifts of light through a window or the way a tree root embraced the earth. The house, their ancestral home, was Silas's magnum opus, built with his own hands over decades, each nail and plank a testament to his ingenuity and foresight. It wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was a living chronicle of their family, a repository of memories, and, as he would later discover, a fortress of his quiet wisdom, designed to withstand not just the elements, but the baser instincts of man. He was 36, and he had spent nearly half his life within its sturdy, comforting walls. After his parents passed when he was young, a sudden, tragic car accident that left him adrift, it was Silas who had become his anchor, his mentor, his world. Silas had instilled in him not just the principles of design and carpentry, the precise measurements and the feel of different wood grains, but also the values of patience, observation, and a profound respect for heritage. While other kids chased fleeting trends and ephemeral fads, he was in the workshop, learning to read the grain of wood, understanding the hidden stresses in a foundation, and, most importantly, listening to his grandfather's often cryptic stories about the house and the land it stood upon. Silas had a knack for weaving profound lessons into seemingly mundane tales about the local history or the peculiar habits of old-growth trees. Silas was a meticulous man, almost to the point of obsession. His journals, filled with elegant script and intricate sketches, detailed not just his building projects but also his thoughts on legacy, community, and the ever-encroaching tide of unchecked development. He believed in preparing for every eventuality, especially when it came to his legacy, his beloved home. He knew of Lysander, even then, long before his cousin's avarice had fully blossomed. Lysander, his cousin, 2 years his senior, was his polar opposite. He was a whirlwind of ambition, always chasing the next big deal, always looking for a shortcut, a way to bypass effort for quick profit. From a young age, Lysander had shown a distinct lack of scruples, a cunning that he often mistook for genuine intelligence. He saw everything through the lens of profit, especially the house, which sat on a prime piece of developing land, its expansive grounds a tempting target for his schemes. That house, Lysander would say during family gatherings, his eyes glinting with avarice as he surveyed the property, it's wasted on Silas, just sitting there. Imagine what you could do with that plot, Dax. High-rise apartments, a commercial complex. The old man's living in the past, holding on to sentimental nonsense. His words, though directed at him, were always meant for Silas, a subtle pressure, a constant suggestion of opportunity being squandered. Silas, with a knowing smile that never quite reached his eyes when Lysander spoke, would simply reply, his voice calm and resonant, "Some things are worth more than money, Lysander. Some things are built to last, not to be sold off piece by piece." He would then turn his attention back to his grandson, a silent affirmation of their shared understanding. His words were more prophetic than any of them knew. As Silas aged, his health gradually fading like a well-worn blueprint, he spent countless hours with his grandson, poring over old blueprints, faded land deeds, and his meticulously kept journals. He didn't just teach him about joists and rafters, he taught him about easements, historical preservation orders, and the labyrinthine intricacies of property law. He revealed hidden compartments within the house, not for valuables or secrets of the past, but for vital documents, original land surveys dating back to the town's founding, obscure municipal zoning regulations from decades past that only a handful of people still remembered, and multiple, subtly different copies of his will, each crafted with a lawyer's precision and a philosopher's foresight. A will, Silas had told him one evening, his voice raspy with age, the firelight casting long shadows on the walls of his study, is not just a declaration of wishes, Dax. It is a shield, and sometimes, a weapon. People only read what they want to see, what confirms their own biases. The devil, my boy, is always in the details. And the details are often hidden in plain sight, or in the forgotten archives of the past, waiting for someone patient enough to unearth them. Silas made him promise to never sell the house, to always be its steward, its guardian. He explained that he had embedded specific, seemingly innocuous clauses within the will, clauses linked to archaic property laws and local historical preservation acts he himself had helped draft decades ago when he was an active, influential member of the community. These clauses were designed to activate under very specific conditions, conditions that would be triggered if someone, like Lysander, attempted to exploit the property for purely commercial gain, without respect for its original purpose or structural integrity. Silas had even worked closely with a select group of trusted local officials and historians, ensuring that these seemingly obscure regulations were deeply embedded in the civic fabric, making them incredibly difficult to circumvent. His secret weapon wasn't a single document or a hidden key, it was a vast, interconnected web of knowledge, meticulously spun by Silas and painstakingly reinforced by him. It was his intimate understanding of the house's every beam and joist, its historical significance, the decades of permits and zoning variances, and the intricate, often overlooked, legal language in his grandfather's final testament. He spent years after Silas's passing, not just maintaining the house with the same love and care Silas had, but meticulously cross-referencing every detail Silas had shown him, verifying every obscure legal reference, and consolidating every piece of information into a comprehensive, unassailable archive. He learned how to navigate the dusty archives of the city planning office, the labyrinthine halls of the county registrar, and the quiet, hallowed rooms of the State Historical Society. He built a network of quiet, old professionals, retired land surveyors with encyclopedic knowledge of ancient property lines, obscure legal scholars who specialized in forgotten statutes, even a few eccentric historians who understood the subtleties of legacy and the enduring value of truth. These individuals, mostly forgotten by the modern world, were his quiet allies, his unseen army. He knew Lysander would come for the house. It was inevitable. Lysander's greed was a predictable force of nature, like the turning of the seasons. What Lysander didn't know was that he wasn't just living in the house, he was living with the house, understanding its very pulse, its defenses. He didn't need to fight Lysander openly, to engage in a messy, public battle of wills. The house itself, and the legal framework his grandfather had so brilliantly constructed around it, would do the fighting for him. His revenge wouldn't be loud, it would be the quiet, inexorable turning of a legal screw, tightening until it broke them. So, when Lysander, armed with falsified documents and supported by Cassian, his slick, corrupt lawyer known for his courtroom theatrics and questionable ethics, initiated the eviction proceedings, he didn't resist. He observed. He let them believe they were winning, let them revel in their perceived triumph. He let them parade their fraudulent papers before the judge, a judge who, unfortunately, was swayed by Cassian's smooth words and the apparent validity of the fabricated deeds. The day they threw him out, he saw their smug faces, their contempt, a raw, undisguised glee in his apparent downfall. They saw his quiet acceptance as weakness, as defeat. But he saw them stepping into the trap, precisely as his grandfather had foreseen, and as he had patiently prepared for. The clock had begun to tick. Lysander and Briar moved into the house with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball, a cacophony of luxury and vulgarity. The ink on the eviction notice was barely dry when their fleet of gleaming luxury cars clogged the quiet street, their decorator vans overflowing with gaudy furniture, oversized, tasteless art, and designer accoutrements. They threw a lavish, housewarming party within days, a vulgar display of their supposed victory, inviting every influential person they knew, every social climber, carefully omitting him, of course, from the guest list. From his small, rented apartment across town, a modest, functional space he had secured with his emergency funds, he could hear the distant roar of their celebratory laughter, the thumping bass of their music vibrating through the night air. It was a symphony of their arrogance, a triumphant ode to their perceived conquest, and to his ears, it was the sweet prelude to their inevitable downfall. Their first move, predictably, was to modernize the house, to erase every trace of Silas's legacy and replace it with their own superficiality. Briar, with her insatiable desire for ostentation and a complete lack of appreciation for true craftsmanship, declared the classic, craftsman's style, dated and boring. She insisted on tearing out the handcrafted oak paneling in the living room, a masterpiece of Silas's intricate marquetry, to replace it with cold, sterile marble and garish chrome. Lysander, meanwhile, focused on the land, his eyes fixed on its vast, untapped potential for profit. He immediately began drawing up plans to subdivide the expansive backyard, hoping to sell off parcels for lucrative development. He envisioned a row of cheap townhouses, maximizing every square inch of the property, utterly obliterating the garden that Silas had so lovingly cultivated. He watched, quietly, from his distant vantage point. He didn't need to be physically present, his foresight had prepared for this. Through his network, a quiet assembly of reliable contacts, and a few strategically placed acquaintances in the city planning department, people who knew Silas and respected his work, he had eyes and ears everywhere. Lysander submitted his subdivision plans, brimming with confidence, expecting a rubber stamp of approval. A week later, the first rejection notice arrived. It was vague, citing historical conservation easements and unresolved boundary disputes, seemingly innocuous bureaucratic jargon. Lysander dismissed it as typical red tape, a minor annoyance. Just a hiccup, he scoffed to Briar, his voice laced with annoyance, overheard by one of his quiet sources within the city hall. Cassian will handle it. Probably just some old forgotten bylaw. Nothing a few calls and a little to grease can't fix. But it wasn't old and forgotten, and it certainly wasn't easily fixable. His grandfather, a fierce environmentalist and local historian, had meticulously secured conservation easements on the property decades ago, long before such things were commonplace, ensuring its green spaces could never be developed beyond a certain, extremely limited footprint. These weren't mere suggestions, they were legally binding restrictions tied to the original land grant, reaffirmed in a hidden codicil to Silas's will, a codicil that only came into effect if the property's primary use shifted from a single-family residence to commercial development. Lysander's plans directly triggered this, like a tripwire. Cashin, relying on the fake deeds and a superficial title search, hadn't done his due diligence on the historical property records, dismissing them as irrelevant. The fines began to pile up, small at first, then growing exponentially with each resubmission and rejection, each attempt to bypass the regulations an additional financial burden. Lysander's frustration mounted with each denied permit, his initial overconfidence slowly eroding into a simmering rage. Next came the interior renovations, Briar's pet project, a testament to her superficial tastes. She ordered the immediate demolition of the old, sturdy kitchen, a warm, inviting space that had served generations, intending to install a state-of-the-art, hypermodern one with more chrome than a spaceship. The moment the contractors, who were clearly more interested in speed than structural integrity, started tearing down a specific load-bearing wall, a cascade of structural problems began to emerge. Silas, with his characteristic foresight and intimate knowledge of architectural principles, had designed a unique internal support system for the house, one that relied on the precise distribution of weight through specific, load-bearing walls that appeared non-structural to the untrained eye. He had built enough fail-safe, if these specific walls were ever compromised without proper support, the entire upper structure would begin to sag, creating visible cracks, alarming shifts in the foundations, and, more critically, triggering specific clauses in the building code related to structural integrity for heritage homes. The city building inspectors, alerted by an anonymous tip, which may or may not have originated from a quiet, observant former resident who held a deep respect for Silas and his craftsmanship, arrived promptly. They were thorough, their faces grim as they surveyed the damage. They slapped a prominent stop work order on the house, citing severe structural deficiencies, potential collapse hazards, and flagrant code violations. The cost to fix it, according to their preliminary assessment, would be astronomical, requiring specialized heritage restoration techniques that only a handful of experts, intimately familiar with Silas's unique methods and the house's specific quirks, could perform. And one of those experts, quite conveniently, was Dax himself, though he remained an unseen figure in the background. Lysander exploded in fury. This is absurd. The house is falling apart. That old man built a death trap, a shoddy mess. He screamed at the contractors, at Briar, at anyone within earshot, his face a mask of disbelief and escalating panic. He didn't realize Silas hadn't built a death trap. He had built a fortress with a very specific set of internal keys, and Lysander had simply tried to force the wrong lock with a sledgehammer. The problems escalated further, each new venture into exploitation triggering another of Silas's carefully placed legal booby traps. Lysander, desperate to generate income from the money pit the house was becoming, tried to lease out portions of the house as short-term rentals, a common practice in their cutthroat real estate circles. But Silas's will contained a clause, again activated by the purely commercial intent, that explicitly prohibited the subleasing of any part of the property without the direct consent of the original steward of the family legacy, a title implicitly, and legally, due to other hidden clauses and the specific wording of the historical trust, bestowed upon him. More fines, more legal battles, more escalating costs, each one a fresh wound to Lysander's already bleeding finances. Their initial joy transformed into palpable frustration, then into outright despair. The house, instead of being their golden goose, was becoming a black hole, sucking their finances dry with insatiable hunger. Lysander started taking out desperate loans, mortgaging other properties, his once thriving ventures suffering as he diverted funds to fight what he perceived as an inexplicable series of bad luck, a relentless, invisible adversary. Briar became increasingly agitated, her designer clothes starting to look a little less pristine, her veneer of confidence cracking under the strain. Their arguments, once hushed and discreet, now echoed through the very walls they had sought to exploit, their voices rising in bitter recriminations and desperate accusations. Lysander accused Briar of wasteful spending, Briar accused Lysander of incompetence. Their lavish parties ceased, replaced by hushed conversations with increasingly aggressive creditors. They still saw him as a pathetic, defeated figure, occasionally glimpsing him walking his quiet neighborhood or working on a small carpentry project in his rented garage, a simple man with simple ambitions. They'd sometimes drive by, Lysander sneering, Briar looking away with a dismissive flick of her wrist, a gesture of disdain. They attributed their mounting troubles to bad luck, incompetent contractors, or an overly zealous city council. The thought that he could be behind any of it never crossed their minds, so consumed were they by their own self-importance and the belief in their own superiority. Their arrogance blinded them, a crucial part of his grandfather's design. His silence, his apparent weakness, was their greatest undoing, the perfect camouflage for his intricate plan. The Zeigarnik effect was in full play. Every problem they encountered, every failed attempt at exploitation, left an open loop of frustration for them, making them obsess over the house, deepening their investment of time and money, and drawing them further into the trap. The curiosity gap was for the audience, who, he hoped, wondered how these seemingly unrelated problems were connected to his quiet plan. The stage was set. They were desperate, cornered, and utterly unaware of the architect of their despair. The climax unfolded not in a dusty, contentious courtroom, but in the polished, sterile boardroom of the city's most prestigious bank. Lysander, utterly drained of funds and facing imminent foreclosure on several of his other properties, had one last desperate play: secure a massive loan, using the ancestral home as collateral, to stave off his creditors and finish the renovations that were bleeding him dry. He had managed to secure a meeting with a shrewd, old-money bank executive, Mr. Thorne, known throughout the city for his meticulous due diligence and his unwavering commitment to the bank's long-term integrity. Lysander, sleek in a tailored suit that barely concealed the tremor in his hands, presented his forged deeds with practiced ease, painting a picture of a prime property about to become a highly profitable asset, a jewel in their portfolio. Briar sat beside him, radiating a false confidence, her eyes darting nervously around the opulent room, betraying the anxiety gnawing at her. Cashin, ever the snake, was there, his usual smooth composure slightly frayed at the edges, ready to parry any legal questions with practiced obfuscation. "Everything is in order, Mr. Thorne," Cashin purred, his voice a low, oily drone, gesturing to a thick binder of documents. "A clean title, clear ownership. The minor setbacks with the city are just bureaucratic nuances. Easily resolved once the financing is in place." He offered a practiced, reassuring smile that did little to calm the tense atmosphere. Mr. Thorne, a man with steel-gray eyes that missed nothing, listened patiently, nodding occasionally, his expression unreadable. He flipped through the documents, his gaze lingering on the property's detailed history, a subtle furrow appearing between his brows. Just as Lysander was launching into his sales pitch about the future high-rise development, a grand vision of towers and commercial complexes that would erase the house's very existence, the boardroom door opened with a soft click. A quiet hush fell as he walked in. He wasn't dressed in a suit, he wore a simple, well-maintained blazer over a collared shirt, looking more like a thoughtful academic or a craftsman than a man about to unleash a storm that would shatter lives. His presence immediately drew Lysander's furious gaze, his eyes narrowing in a mixture of confusion and explosive rage. "Dax! What in the blazes are you doing here?" Lysander roared, half rising from his chair, his hands clenching into fists. "Security! Get this man out of here!" His voice echoed in the suddenly silent room. Mr. Thorne, however, raised a hand, a calm, commanding gesture that instantly quelled Lysander's outburst. "Hold on, Mr. Lysander. Mr. Silas's will, the original, very clearly states a clause for any legal challenges to the property to be heard with all interested parties present. Mr. Dax, as the primary beneficiary of the original will and the designated steward of the family legacy, has every right to be here. In fact, his presence was requested by our legal team, given the complexities of this particular property. Mr. Thorne's gaze briefly met his, a silent acknowledgement of the meticulous preparations. His entrance wasn't a surprise attack. It was a planned, meticulously executed reveal, the culmination of years of quiet work. His network had informed him of this meeting, and he had simply exercised his right, as the true inheritor under Silas's specific conditions, to be present at any discussion concerning the property's encumbrance. He walked to an empty chair at the far end of the table and sat, his expression calm, his gaze direct and unwavering, meeting Lysander's furious eyes without flinching. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice clear and steady, cutting through Lysander's sputtering protests and Cashin's sudden, nervous cough. "And Briar." He apologized for the intrusion, but there were a few details regarding this property that seemed to have been overlooked. He didn't produce a single document immediately. Instead, he started talking, calmly, about the house itself. Not about its market value, but its history. He spoke of Silas's vision, the precise angles of the sunlight in the morning room, the hidden support beams woven into the very fabric of the structure, the unique composition of the soil and the garden that supported rare native plants. He spoke of the original land grant, dating back to the late 1800s, signed by his great-great-grandfather, and a forgotten deed restriction that tied the property to a local historical trust, stipulating that any commercial alteration of the land beyond a single-family dwelling would revert ownership to that trust, with a hefty penalty clause for damages incurred during any such attempt. He spoke not as an accuser, but as a historian, a guardian of truth. Lysander scoffed, a desperate, defiant sound. "Nonsense. That's ancient history. Cashin has all the valid deeds here, fully registered and approved." He gestured wildly at the binder of documents, his confidence visibly wavering. "Indeed," he replied, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips, a subtle, almost imperceptible tilt of his head. "But Mr. Thorne's legal team, unlike yours, Mr. Lysander, seems to have done their due diligence. They uncovered the original, legally registered historical trust document, signed by his great-great-grandfather, reaffirmed by Silas, and sealed with an obscure state-level Land Preservation Act that was quietly enacted decades ago. This act, unbeknownst to most, rendered any subsequent private commercial subdivisions of properties under such trusts null and void, and triggered specific clauses regarding the immediate transfer of ownership if violated." Cashin went pale, his face draining of color, the mask of the slick lawyer crumbling to reveal genuine fear. He had relied on a simple title search, ignoring the deeper, dustier archives. He had been so sure of the forged documents' unassailability. Then he presented his irrefutable evidence, each piece a carefully aimed arrow. First, he laid out detailed, original blueprints of the house, signed and dated by Silas, showing the precise locations of the load-bearing walls and the unique structural system, elegant in its complexity. Then, he projected images onto the large screen at the head of the table, photos taken by anonymous city inspectors, showing the very cracks and structural damage that had appeared after Lysander's contractors had begun their unauthorized demolition, a stark visual testament to the destruction. He explained, in calm, precise architectural terms, how Lysander's renovations had irreparably compromised the house's unique integrity, triggering the most devastating clause of all. His grandfather, he stated, his voice carrying across the silent room, each word a hammer blow, had a specific provision in his will. A clause that stated the house, if its structural integrity was ever compromised by a reckless or unapproved alteration for commercial gain, would not only revert ownership to the local historical society for restoration, but also legally require the party responsible for the damage to bear the entire cost of restoration, including all accrued fines for code violations and historical preservation breaches, at current market rates for specialized heritage work. He then placed a thick folder on the table, its weight feeling immense in the sudden silence. He believed this was the estimate from the city's Heritage Restoration Department, along with the accumulated fines for the zoning violations and structural damages incurred over the past months. The sum, he was afraid, exceeded any possible market value of the property, even if it were legally sellable. And it was not. The room erupted. Lysander, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage and disbelief, lunged across the table, his chair scraping loudly across the polished floor. You tricked me. That old man, he set this up from the grave. He corrected Lysander calmly, meeting his furious gaze without a flicker of fear. He merely ensured his legacy would be protected from those who sought to exploit it. You, Lysander, willingly walked into this. You ignored every warning, every ethical boundary. You sought to destroy what was cherished for quick profit, driven by unchecked greed. And the house, in its own silent way, resisted. It always resists those who seek to harm it. Mr. Thorne, his expression grim, pushed the loan application binder back towards Lysander, a gesture of finality. Mr. Lysander, he said, his voice cold and final, cutting through the residual tension. Given these revelations, and the now apparent, massive legal and financial liabilities attached to this property, not to mention the fraudulent nature of the documents you presented, our bank cannot, under any circumstances, proceed with this loan. In fact, our legal department will be reviewing your other assets and loans with us very carefully, given the implications of these findings. Briar let out a small, strangled gasp, her false confidence completely shattered, her eyes wide with dawning horror. Cashin, his face ashen, began to stammer excuses, his carefully constructed reputation collapsing around him, but Mr. Thorne cut him off with a dismissive wave, a gesture of absolute contempt. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Briar's quiet sobbing, a chilling sound in the sterile room. Lysander stood frozen, his eyes wide with a dawning horror, staring not at him, but at the house that was no longer his, but a monument to his own spectacular folly. The ultimate revelation wasn't just that he'd lost the house, it was that he'd lost everything, and he was the one who had engineered his own demise through his insatiable greed and arrogance. The fallout was swift and brutal, a cascade of financial ruin. Within weeks, Lysander's entire real estate empire, built precariously on a foundation of dubious deals and leveraged assets, imploded. The bank, alerted by Mr. Thorne's findings and now thoroughly investigating all of Lysander's financial dealings, pulled his credit lines. His other properties, already teetering on the brink, were foreclosed upon with ruthless efficiency. The fines for the ancestral home, coupled with the astronomical costs of the mandated heritage restoration, which he was legally obligated to pay, regardless of ownership, thanks to Silas's foresight, crippled him financially. Cashin, his reputation irrevocably stained by the fraudulent documents and his gross negligence, was disbarred and faced potential criminal charges, his carefully constructed life of deceit crumbling into dust. Lysander and Briar, accustomed to a life of opulence and endless spending, found themselves utterly destitute. Their lavish cars were repossessed, their designer clothes sold for pennies on the dollar by desperate creditors. The penthouse apartment they had leased was reclaimed, its luxurious trappings now a cruel memory. Their friends, the fair-weather companions who had flocked to their wealth and social standing, vanished overnight, unwilling to be associated with such a spectacular failure. They had nothing. No home, no money, no reputation, their lives reduced to a hollow echo of their former extravagance. He saw them once, months later, near the city center, a stark, haunting image. Lysander, once so arrogant and impeccably dressed, was shabbier, his clothes rumpled and ill-fitting, his eyes hollow and haunted, reflecting a profound, inescapable misery. Briar, her once flashing smile replaced by a grimace of despair, clutched a threadbare coat around her, her face drawn and aged beyond her years. They were arguing, their voices hushed, desperate, each word a testament to their shattered lives. They walked past him without recognition, lost in their own misery, their hands outstretched to passers-by, their words a mumbled plea for spare change. The title's promise had come true. They were begging on the streets, their lives a stark, desolate wasteland. Other family members, those who had been swayed by Lysander's charm and apparent success, or who had simply dismissed his quiet nature as social awkwardness, began to approach him with hesitant apologies and newfound respect. They had seen the true nature of greed, and the quiet, undeniable power of integrity. He accepted their apologies with a quiet nod, understanding that their validation wasn't what he sought. His actions were for Silas, for the house, for the balance of justice. His resolution was simple: return to what was truly his, what had always been meant for him. The house, after months of meticulous restoration work funded by Lysander's seized assets, was finally whole again. The Historical Society oversaw the repairs, ensuring every detail was true to Silas's original vision, honoring his craftsmanship. He was appointed its official steward, living within its walls once more, resuming his quiet life of design and carpentry. The splintered workbench, once a symbol of destruction, was painstakingly repaired by his own hands, its scars now telling a new story of resilience and rebirth. The porcelain vase, though shattered beyond repair, taught him a lesson in cherishing what remains, in finding beauty even in fragments. The house, once a symbol of conflict and avarice, became a haven of peace and quiet strength. It stood, not just as a monument to Silas's genius and foresight, but as a testament to the quiet strength of patience and the enduring power of justice. It served as a constant reminder that true wealth lies not in material possessions or fleeting power, but in integrity, in legacy, and in the quiet wisdom that knows how to protect what truly matters. Those who seek to build their fortune on the ruins of others' legacies often find themselves buried beneath their own greed, for the universe, in its own subtle way, always seeks balance. This story, like many others on our channel, is a testament to the quiet power of justice and the enduring lessons life teaches us. If you found Dax's journey inspiring, or if you appreciate stories where intelligence triumphs over avarice, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next upload. And tell us, have you ever faced such blatant ingratitude or attempted injustice? What did you do to overcome it? Or, what would you have done if you were in Dax's shoes? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We love hearing from you.